Hi, I'm Silver, and I'm wicked excited for season 3 of Mob Psycho. Mob Psycho 100 is definitely in my top 5, and I've been wanting to rewatch the seasons 1 and 2 before the next one comes out this fall. And I decided I wanted to take a good look at how these characters have changed since the beginning to now. Reagan and Mom have a lot of really amazing character development, but so do a lot of the more minor characters. So I figured I'd dive into each episode and really look into these characters as they grow. These videos will contain spoilers. I've already seen all of these episodes, so I'll probably reference future episodes and such. Also, should note that I'm very socially anxious, even in just the context of recording this video, so I'm sorry if this is super uncomfortable. I'm trying to work on my anxiety, which is part of the reason why I'm deciding to make these videos. But before I get too rambly, let's just get started with episode 1, Self-Proclaimed Psychic, Reagan Arataka, and Mob. Okay, so first we have this absolutely wonderful fight scene, and then after that we get into our first character, which is Reagan Arataka. And my first thoughts about the conman psychic were that, one, I didn't know why people were thirsting so hard for him, and two, that he was a really big asshole. So I will say that before I started watching Mob Psycho 100, one of the reasons why I did, and that this probably outs me, but whatever, was a lot of people online. Oh my god, Stephen, my dog's touching me. A lot of people online saying that Reagan Arataka was like a sex icon, and I didn't really get it. Like, I could see like the pictures and gifs of him, and I was like, okay, yeah, maybe he's got like this thing going on. So I watched the show, and like after this first episode, I was like, okay, I don't know. But I love how charming he is, and despite like blatantly insulting Hanako, she is still just eating up everything he has to say. We learn a bit about him and what exactly is going on here as he explains his course system for exorcising evil spirits. Now, as soon as this little shit slapped down the paper and read off the percentages of each course, I knew he was a little scammer. I've seen so many people really unsure of whether or not Reagan has powers until like several episodes deep into the first season, and it blows my mind that he's outright tricking the audience as well. I think that it's pretty apparent that Reagan does not have any powers from his very first scene. Of course, Taro, Hanako's boyfriend, is also there, even though he's not in the establishing shot of the room. He's calling Reagan out for being a fake, and Reagan isn't flinching. He's unfazed. He even redirects Taro's disbelief onto Hanako and spirits in general. He is definitely a well-established manipulator, and he has no issue with just absolutely gaslighting his way through any situation. He has this lovely line of telling them that Hanako's face should go back to normal after the exorcism, which is just an outright insult, since he's, at this point, he's not even convinced that the spirit is real yet. He's just being rude, and Hanako still follows him and still believes him. He's just so charming and so good at what he's doing that he has this girl so wrapped around his finger, and she still takes him to the location of the haunting, despite him outright calling her ugly. And I love that Reagan is obviously a showman. Like, on the scene, he's quick to point at the building and pull a whole scene out of his ass about how powerful it is. And of course, he points at the wrong building because he can't sense anything. He is not a psychic. But in this first episode, Reagan also really comes off as really mean-spirited. He'll do anything and say anything that he thinks will keep convincing these people that he's the real thing, i.e. the Butchin Goblin. But once he realizes Taro won't believe he's a psychic, no matter what, he easily falls into calling him a skeptic and directs the rest of his energy to keeping Hanako on his side. Reagan, in just these like first few scenes he has alone, shows that he's good at reading people and knowing who is going to be the easiest to con. Once we're inside the building that Hanako says is haunted, she's explaining the ceiling crusher and how he saw a cockroach and jumped and died or whatever. And Reagan is acting more serious now, looking all around and showing some fear. And Taro chalks it up to maybe this is the real deal, but Reagan's just scared of cockroaches. And to be fair, aren't all great psychics afraid of cockroaches? But I really like that Reagan is not hiding the fact that he is just scared of the cockroaches. Like, he is just genuinely afraid of the cockroaches. He is kind of dropping the con man facade for a second there to be like, oh shit, like there's bugs here, gross. Then we get this really cool animation for the ghost showing up. I love it so much. I love it every time I see it. Anyways, Reagan is not afraid of the ghost. He sees it and thinks about how, he didn't expect an evil spirit to actually show up. And then he uses his special move, of course, Salt Splash. But I'd like to point out how interesting it is that Reagan was not scared. He is powerless and standing face to face with an evil spirit, but he's cool, he even attacks it. And when he doesn't work, he doesn't, freak out or, anything. He freaks out a little bit, but it's more about the fact that his information about Salt was wrong than it is that he is now potentially angered an evil spirit. But he just calls Mob, and then in probably my favorite scene of the first episode, the evil spirit just waits until Mob gets there. It's so funny every time. The fact that this evil spirit just stands there, just giving Reagan this dirty ass look until Mob shows up is perfect writing. I don't know how long it took Mob to get there, but I'd like to think it took him at least 15 minutes. And then, of course, we're introduced to Mob. He blasts this ghost's ass, just easy peasy, ghost is gone. And he's just so powerful, but obviously exceptionally awkward. And he's the student of this confident con man. And when I first saw this, my mind put together these things and incorrectly guessed where the plot would go. I figured Reagan would eventually become like an obstacle for Mob, someone who's using him and isn't actually doing anything to help him. And I really love that the master-student aspect doesn't really have anything to do with Mob's powers. Instead, Reagan is teaching Mob skills he doesn't have, and not really on purpose. But we obviously don't know that yet, so I will get to that in later episodes. Then, obviously, after we are finally introduced to our main character, 7 minutes into the episode, we get the absolute amazing OP. It is so good. I love this first OP, and I also love the imagery of Reagan Arataka being a tall glass of water. I giggle at that every time I see it. Then we finally get our first scene of just Reagan and Mob interacting with one another, and Reagan still is just coming off as this giant asshole. He once again says that he didn't expect the spirit to even show up, meaning that he fully intended on just outright conning these people, doing some fake exorcism, and then taking their money. And obviously Mob comes and exorcises the spirit, and he takes their money, and then severely underpays Mob. And I love that Mob, at first, when I first saw Mob, I was like, okay, so he's a middle schooler, he's really awkward, and he's being used by this con man who is clearly has no psychic powers, and he's just using this kid that does have psychic powers. And I am doing my rewatch with the dubbed version, because I actually really like the dub of Mob Psycho 100, and I've been doing other stuff as well while I'm rewatching it, so it just is easier to not have to read the subtitles. But I don't know if this line is in the sub or not. I don't remember, unfortunately. But Reagan says something along the lines of, it was a really low-level evil spirit, so I shouldn't be paying you more than half. But think of your full pay as a bonus. And he really reminds me of, every manager I've had. Not every manager, but most managers I've ever had at, a shitty customer service level job, either working in retail or in the food service. like, it gives me this, like, visceral reaction of, like, times when I was working at a place and sometimes we wouldn't, like, get our full tips if, like, the register was, like, short a couple bucks. Like, we'd all, like, get docked some of our tips to be put in the register, like, even if we weren't on the register. So I think the character of Reagan really is horrible in the first episode. Like, I genuinely, if I was to form an opinion of Reagan from just episode 1, I would not like him. And I think that really speaks volumes to currently Reagan is probably one of my all-time favorite anime characters. And just looking at episode 1, I would not think that. But anyways, I digress. In this scene with Mob and Reagan sitting in the office after the job, we get a little more information about Mob, a character that we're just now meeting. We have an opinion of Reagan now. We know he's kind of a jerk, he's a con man, but who is this little boy? And Mob is asking Reagan, like, why he would even call him for this, like, low-level spirit. And we really get the sense that Mob maybe doesn't know that Reagan is not a psychic, and honestly, I had no idea. Like, when I first watched this, I wasn't sure if Mob knew. Like, he seems really, like, awkward and naive, but after a few episodes, I was like, maybe he does know. But in this first episode, I feel like Mob he's so, like, hard to read because of, like, his blank expression and his monotone voice that I do think maybe he thinks Reagan is a psychic, but I'm not really sure. I do love this scene because it more is just ham-fisting that this man is not a psychic. And Mom's like, oh, okay, if you say so, you say so. But we get into a little more of, like, Reagan is Mob's master, and he gives him this speech about not putting his psychic powers to waste. And Mob is just kind of watching him speak. And I really, the first episode, I really couldn't tell what my opinions on Mob were. I knew that he was absolutely adorable and I loved him. But who he was as a character, I couldn't really tell. And I will say, this might be a little bit controversial, but I don't really like One Punch Man. The main character always kind of didn't intrigue me because I can't even remember his name right now, but One Punch Man himself was just kind of bland, and I didn't really understand him or kind of relate to him. Whereas Mob is a very similar character who is extremely overpowered and kind of bland, for lack of a better word, but his blandness kind of comes from him being like an awkward middle schooler that has all this power, but he doesn't know really how to use it, doesn't really know what to do with it, and I think that makes him a much more interesting main character. Then we meet Mob's family. We meet his mom, his dad, and his little brother Ritsu, who looks more like his older brother Ritsu, but that's fine. And I like this whole spoon debacle, the trope of the psychic bending the spoon, and I like that he kind of has this rather normal family dynamic despite the fact that he is a psychic. So he bends the spoon while he's eating his dinner, and his mom yells at him for bending spoons. Well, she doesn't really yell at him, but she's like stern with him about how she doesn't want him bending any more spoons. And his father is kind of doting on him. It's like, oh, he's just going through puberty, you know how boys are. And then there's Ritsu, his little brother, who really comes off as, like, caring and sweet. And we're told that Ritsu is very smart. He did really well on his quizzes and stuff. And Ritsu says, like, oh, you know, anybody can do that, but only my big brother can do the things he can do. He really comes off as this, like, sweet, caring little brother. And upon, like, first viewing of this family scene, it just seems like, oh, like, Mob has this really nice little family. It's very cute. And that's really all the information we get on his family for now. And then we get some more information on Mob himself. After the family scene, we get to see him kind of in just like a regular day of school for him, where he just is like your normal average middle schooler. He has a crush on a girl, he sleeps in class, he's not very athletic. And I think that these things really make Mob very relatable, where he does have this one thing he's really, really good at, but he doesn't really seem very passionate about the thing he's good at, and then everything else is just kind of difficult for him. And then we get into the end of the first episode, where Reagan and Mob have taken on another job at this tunnel that has been rumored to have a lot of haunting and accidents at it. And I really like that it's really just further proving that Reagan has no powers, but people still think he did. And Reagan and Mob go to the tunnel, and at first Mob is kind of hanging back, and Reagan, confidently walks in like nothing can stop him, only for him to run back out again and be like, Mob, why aren't you coming with me to do the exorcism? And this is another part that really, I wasn't sure, like, if Mob knew that Reagan was a psychic or not, and he's telling Reagan, like, oh yeah, like, there's a really powerful spirit in there, I can sense it. And this does kind of spook Reagan a little bit, but he still goes into the tunnel, fully feeling safe and fine with Mob with him, which shows that he really relies on Mob, and he understands that Mob is very powerful, and useful for him in what he does. And this is really like the first glimpse into the fact that Reagan does do these things partially because he wants to help people, and not just as a way to like get money and to con people. Like, he's gone to this extremely haunted place and is having Mob exorcise these spirits because they are dangerous, and people have been like going missing and stuff because of these spirits in this tunnel. But I think upon like the first viewing, you might not initially think like, oh, he wants to stop these spirits because he wants to help people. Your first thought is most likely going to be, he wants to stop these spirits because he's going to get a lot of money. And Reagan is truly just a very confident man. He is just walking ahead. He has Mob behind him, like, fighting all these evil spirits. I think he said that there were like 12 of them surrounding him and Reagan. And Reagan just keeps on waltzing ahead inside of this supposedly very haunted evil tunnel, and he bumps into a evil spirit strong enough that he can actually see it. And his first thought isn't, oh, this is an evil spirit. His first thought is, this is a wrestler for some reason. And he is not afraid. I think that consistently Reagan sees things that should frighten people, but he, I guess, is just used to seeing them, so he's not scared by them. And then when Mob tells him, like, hey, there's an evil spirit over there, Reagan's first, I guess, thought is to accuse the spirit of trying to trick him into thinking he was a wrestler. And again, Reagan doesn't really show much fear of the wrestler, or the evil spirit. Oh my god. He's like shouting at it and like being angry with it, and the evil spirit goes into this like monologue about how they died, and he's like this big scary evil spirit, and the evil spirit straight up goes to attack Reagan, and Reagan just stands there. Mob obviously protects him, but Reagan doesn't like tremble in fear or anything. He stands there and fully acts like he was the one to protect himself. And this exuding of confidence is enough to even trick the evil spirit for a moment to think that Reagan is a psychic, because this man is fearless and confident, and he goes for it, and it punches this spirit right in the face, even though he has no power, and he even should know at this point that the salt is nothing. And when it doesn't work, and the spirit is like, oh, you're a fake, Reagan just stands there as Mob starts to exorcise him, and he completely hands it up like he's the one doing anything, when he is obviously not doing anything. And then we get into this lovely moment of Mob wanting to hear the evil spirit out and, listen to what he has to say, while Reagan is just kind of punch first, ask questions later. And I think it's our first glimpse into Mob being more emotionally and mentally aware of this gray area between spirits and humans that Reagan doesn't understand because he is not a psychic. Reagan just sees, like, oh, it's an evil spirit, exorcise it. Whereas Mob can kind of see the more human side of this biker man, where, they both heard his story about his gang, and Mob is kind of more understanding with the spirit, whereas Reagan immediately is like, oh, don't trust him, he's lying, kill it. We're here to kill the spirits, so kill the spirits. And then it is once again displayed just how powerful Mob is. He goes up against this ancient evil beast of an evil spirit, and we also get to see that Reagan isn't just using Mob, he does care about him. And this is our first instance of Reagan telling Mob to, like, run away, that he doesn't have to go up against this evil spirit, that it could be too powerful for him, and he should get out of there instead of getting himself hurt. And of course, Mob is exceptionally overpowered, so he can defeat this monster, but Reagan is still worried about him. And I think it's important that we do get to see that, because I think this is the first moment where you're like, okay, so maybe Reagan isn't as bad as he seems. And I love how after Mob defeats this evil spirit, he returns to Reagan, and Biker Ghost is like, oh my gosh, like, who are you? How did you defeat this evil spirit? And Mob says that he is nobody. He doesn't see himself as a strong, powerful person. He sees himself as the little middle school boy who sleeps in class and can't participate in gym because he's small and weak. And Reagan, of course, corrects him, and he's like, well, you're not nobody. You're my student. And the episode obviously ends with Mob helping the biker gang move on peacefully instead of exorcising them. And I think that's a really sweet ending. And my final thoughts on these characters that we met, we really only met Mob and Reagan in the first episode. The other characters that were introduced, we really got nothing about them. But for Reagan, first thoughts are he's slimy and a con man, and obviously not a psychic, who's just using this young boy. The young boy being Mob, who is unsure of himself and needs to grow a lot mentally, whereas he doesn't need to grow power-wise, which I think is a lovely concept, where normally in shonen anime you have your main character who really needs to become powerful and amazing, and their training is on their skills and their powers, whereas Mob is already powerful. He doesn't need to learn any more powers. What he needs to train is his belief in himself and his mental capacity of understanding the world around him. First episode, Reagan and Mob are kind of basic characters, which we'll have to continue working on, where Reagan is going to go from this kind of pathetic con man to something more, and Mob is going to go from this kind of shy and insecure person to something more. And I'm excited to keep looking at how and when these characters become more than what they are in this first episode. So if you enjoyed this for some reason, I will be posting another one of episode 2 very soon. Thank you for watching, and I will see you then. Bye.